You ready, Ben? Those eggs stink.
Dude, everything I eat stinks.
Here we are, Real Recovery Talk. I am your host, Tom Conrad. In today's episode, we have Benjamin B.
What's happening, everyone?
It's just us today, Ben.
It is.
This is fun.
Yeah, like a little date.
Yeah. First things first, thank you for tuning in on the podcast app, whichever podcast player you choose to use, whether that's Spotify, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Google Play Music, whatever other ones, I don't know.
YouTube.
Thank you for watching on YouTube. And, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you can always reach out to myself or Ben at tom@realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And we will, ask you for your phone number and have a conversation with you about your specific situation. So hopefully we can help you turn your mess into your message. How's that, Ben?
That was pretty spot on.
How's things going?
No complaints. It's been a busy week.
Yeah?
Yeah, very.
Why?
Today's Kai's birthday, too.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. And 1 year today, we adopted him.
Aw.
So it's kind of cool that his adoption landed on his birthday.
Tears.
Yep. 5 years old.
Who would have thunk that you would have, because you had your son originally taken from you?
Yeah, so my wife and I lost custody of our son at one point when he was an infant, and then a little later down the line, too. Again, I get my timelines mixed up, but within his first or second year. So the whole irony is, we go from being folks that get our kid taken away to now we're being asked to adopt a kid, found ourselves in that situation. Story for another day. But you know what I mean?
It's a pretty cool story, and we'll have to share it one of these days. That's for certain. How's the training going?
It is going. It's consistency is key, and it's getting hard.
What's hard about it? What do you mean?
The amount of time that it takes, really. I mean, it's a 24/7 job. Getting up extra early every morning, make sure that all the food is prepped. And I would like to think I would get it ready the night before, but generally speaking, between work, the kids, the gym, which I only go to the gym 4 days a week in actuality. A lot of people ask me, they're like, oh, you're in the gym every day, twice a day? I'm like, no, I actually only go to the gym 4 days a week.
For like an hour each time.
Yeah. The majority of this is about eating.
How are you finding the balance to do it?
Ooh, that's a tough one. It's just constantly, and I'll relate this to recovery. I was actually talking with the group yesterday about this when I was facilitating group, but there's really no such thing as balance in recovery. A lot of times it comes up in meetings as a topic. Oh, let's have the discussion be how to find balance in recovery. And the fact of the matter is, what I've come to find out after years and years and years of looking at that is, it's about constantly evaluating on a daily basis, maybe a weekly basis, and making adjustments. Because the truth of the matter is, for instance, I look at the things that are probably the pillars in my life. My recovery, which is like my meetings and my sponsees, my family, so the kids, the wife, and work, right? Those are the three main ones. And I've found over the course of time, when I start doing really well in one, another area drops. So it's constantly kind of like a seesaw, jumping back and forth. And, if my meeting attendance is really good, I'm doing really good with my sponsees. Generally, if I'm honest about it, my family's suffering. And then I kind of got to balance it back the other way, make sure that I'm spending more time with family, more time with the kids, maybe miss a meeting. It's a recovery, while it definitely, I believe, has to be front and center, I also have to remember the things that recovery's given me and take care of those things too, such as my family.
So how's the training for the bodybuilding? Because you mentioned work, family, and recovery, but now you have the bodybuilding, which, let's just call it what it is. This is not something that is like, oh, I'm going to do this for 2 weeks. You've been going at this now since
September. And One thing that I'll say, I'm fortunate to have Whitney, who does support me doing it, because when we met way back when, 2008, I competed in 2009, and she knew I wanted to do this one more time before we get too old. Tom and I will be 39 next week, April 7th.
That's right, April 7th. You'll be 39 a few hours before me.
Yeah, we're literally born, for those that don't know, the same day, same year. So,
right.
Yeah. Where was I going with that, though? But, yeah, Whitney's been very supportive in it, where, I said, I'll be like, God, I'm getting burned out on this, or I wish I just didn't have to do this right now. Like the other day, she's like, oh, I tell you what, I'll make your chicken and your rice for you. Which I don't expect her to, but she's been really supportive of that and really helped me. If it wasn't for her being accepting of me doing this, it probably wouldn't make sense. If that meant,
well, it'd be a lot harder. It'd be a lot harder. And then that would, if it was something that she wasn't accepting of and wasn't willing to support you with, but you did it anyway, now it's just another thing that supersedes your family.
Exactly. And let's call it what it is. Bodybuilding is a very selfish sport.
Is it even a sport?
Well, dude, I would say so. Yeah. What do you mean?
I mean, I equate sport with like basketball, football, hockey, tennis, golf. Bodybuilding is,
maybe it's more of a discipline.
That I would say is an appropriate. I mean, listen to any bodybuilders out there that listen to this, and I know there are some. I'm not throwing shade at all. I can't do it.
That's what I was going to say too. I've always been, you look at my personality with my active addiction, the way I did addiction, bodybuilding. Say when I do something, I'm all in. And
You're an addict.
Yeah. I'll be honest, I don't think most people could do what I'm doing right now. Not with the consistency, the amount of time. You can't mess up a day. Like, don't get me wrong, things have come up once in a while with, like, there's an emergency at work and throws off my day and I didn't get all my meals in or something like that, or I'm doing it in an order that I shouldn't be doing. I always get it done, though. And I just don't think most people have the discipline to do it. It is an addict mentality.
Yeah, I mean, you got to be a special kind of maniac to go through what you're going through. That's for sure. Well, glad to see it's going well, and we'll see what happens. So what happens though? Like, you're eating so much food now. At some point, you just cut the calories way back, and then you shrink up, and then you go step on stage?
Yeah, so it's kind of like having a sponsor. I got my coach Billy that I've been on the podcast, and still prayers out for him. His wife passed away a couple weeks ago. We mentioned on a previous podcast. But yeah, so it was kind of funny because actually I was doing an adventure group yesterday with the clients, and Nick, our director of operations, started laughing. He's like, because we all jumped in the ocean afterwards. He's like, you're doing all this and no six pack? You know how Nick is.
Yeah.
Just very straightforward, which is a good quality that he has. But it was kind of funny. And I'm like, well, we're not at that point in it yet. Right now it's about getting as much muscle as possible. But yes, 12 weeks out from the show, I will be cutting down calories. Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've heard rumors. I don't know for sure because I haven't done it with Billy yet. But rumor on the street is it's something like eating like 6 ounces of grilled chicken and 2 pickle spears, and that's like a meal.
Oh, that sounds fun.
Yeah, no. So
yeah, well,
one end of the spectrum to the other, and
we'll see. We'll see how things go, and you've done it this long, so you might as well see it through to the end. All right, so we wanted to come on and talk. There was one of our listeners actually sent me a text message probably a week ago, and she had a list of questions that she would want us to discuss, and so Ben and I looked it over, and a lot of this stuff we've talked about in a roundabout way, but it's always good to get this from people because, just because you listen now doesn't mean that you've listened to episode 163 when we talked about this or whatever the case is. I mean, there's almost 270 episodes, and if you've listened to every single one, send us an email. I'd like to send you a t-shirt or something. I don't know. Appreciate the loyalty. But her question is something that she would like to hear about is sometimes clients do not remember all they have done. Is it wise for loved ones to remind them? Sometimes the clients do not remember all they have done. Clients meaning, okay, you found us through the podcast and your loved one has managed to now come to our treatment center, Rock Recovery Center here in Florida. So they don't remember all the stuff that they've put their family through, and is it wise for the loved ones to remind them? My initial thought is no. Like, what good does it do? But, I got to think about it, and I do think that there could be a time and place for this, and I'll get to that. But Ben, what's your initial thoughts?
Initially, my quick out of the gate answer is no. However, I do stand with you on that, Tom. There's an appropriate way to do this, and Tom and I are interventionists, and none of this is black and white. And we've said on the podcast before, what we got to be good at is adjusting to a situation, knowing when to utilize which strategies, which tactics, etc. But what I'm going to look at, Tom, is what's the motive behind it?
Right.
And, if you are a loved one and if you're waiting on an amends or an apology, don't do that, because you may be let down. Essentially, you could be very likely setting an expectation that'll never get met. And then, so I guess as far as motives, like, are you looking for it to make yourself feel better? And let me also touch on this as well. Hopefully, during the amends process, because through 12 steps, step 8 and 9 in particular is actually making the amends, but there is hopefully a time and a place, when appropriate, when that loved one, that client, the addict, will come forward, and that'll be part of their amends. I could go into more detail on that. I think maybe in a few minutes, it'd be something good to talk about, because it goes for both sides, And Al-Anon, they also work 12 steps. And for those that don't know, Al-Anon is the 12-step program for the families. And just in case you haven't heard the previous episodes, the easiest way for me to explain it is Alcoholics and Addicts. We have Alcoholics Anonymous, Narcotics Anonymous, 12-step programs, all the anonymous programs. Al-Anon is more like we're powerless over the addict themselves. Like, you cannot control whether or not they get sober. What's the 3 C's? You didn't cause it, you can't cure it, and
you can't cause it. You didn't cause it, you can't cure it, and you can't control
it. That was the other one. I always forget the third one. So, while Alcoholics and Addicts focus on the alcohol and drugs, Al-Anon is focused, it's for the families. And this is why it's so important for families to do Al-Anon, because here they are too. They have an amends, step 9 also. It's the same 12 steps. Maybe they owe some amends. And it's funny, I had a client ask me one time, years ago, I'll never forget this girl, really heavy Southern accent. Ben, how long do I wait for somebody to give me an amends? I'm like, well, you don't. If you're waiting for an amends, again, like, you're kind of missing the point. Because your responsibility as someone in a 12-step program, whether that be Al-Anon as a family member or the addict, your responsibility is to clean your side of the street, live your life by principles. It's all about looking at you. Stop looking at the addict. The addict needs to stop looking at the family and who did what, because I have there's another way that we look at it in recovery also, is if we get stuck in the who did it to me, what they did, and how it made me feel, and we never get past that, we're never going to get better on either side, whether you're the addict or whether you're the family.
Well, you're ultimately, if we look at it through that lens, you're playing the victim card.
Victims don't stay sober. I tell our clients that all the time. You got to get out of that mentality. Same goes for the family too, though. And I want to just reiterate how important it is for families to work a program. I want to overemphasize the fact that and Tom and I have said this before, where I announced this in last family weekend, actually, to be honest with you. I had said, sometimes we get a client in here and I turn around after dealing with the family and I'm like, my God, the family needs more work than the client does. You've seen that.
I would venture to say more often than not, the family needs more work than the client does. And that's not to say that the families are sicker or anything else. It's, there's no like, we're not in a race to see, or it's not a competition to see who's more sick. It just means, because generally you have the addict over here, but then you have mom, dad, sister, brother, aunt, uncle. You have a whole family dynamic, so yes, we're addressing the addict themselves, us here clinically, but we have to also rely on the family. The family has to be willing to do some work on themselves in order for this whole thing to work. Because if we just treat the addict and we just treat your loved one, and loved one comes back home and nobody on the side of the family has done any work or, saw their part in things and stuff like that, we're essentially just sending them right back into the same environment, the same people, the same places, the same things. Everybody in the family carries the same attitude. It's your fault. You did this, so on and so forth, which is why it's important that families do recognize we do play a part in this. In the 12 years that I've been doing this, I cannot say comfortably I have not met a family yet that does not have some level of dysfunction within it. And that's not throwing stones. That's just being a family. And if you're a family that you claim that you don't have any level of dysfunction, you're probably one of the most dysfunctional families out there, and not willing to look at it and to really draw attention to it, which makes things extremely, extremely difficult. So that is why we say families oftentimes, are harder to work with than the addict themselves, because they're oblivious to it a lot of times. Hence why these support groups are so important, because, when you go into these meetings and you surround yourself with these families and stuff, you start to hear things, you start to pick up on things, and you start to relate. And that is when you can start to see, you may think, oh, our family's perfectly fine. Johnny had a full ride scholarship to college, or we were willing to pay his whole way into college. We gave Johnny everything that he wanted, so on and so forth. But when you really look at the family in detail, you do find there's a lot of dysfunction. And if that stuff's not brought to the surface, then we're really doing everybody a disservice, and it makes our job extremely difficult. And it ultimately, the addict themselves is the one that suffers the most, because we've seen a lot where people go back to their home state, they're back into their childhood home or wherever they, came from, and the family's not prepared for somebody to have such a drastic change. If somebody spends 4 months with us and they do all this intense therapeutic work and they haven't put any substances in their body for 4 months, 5 months, 6 months, and they go back into a home that is the same as the home that they left, it's really, it's tough. I mean, and it's sad.
Well, I'll say it like this, just in layman's terms. A lot of times what we see is that families are like, if the addict just gets better, then everything's okay.
Yeah.
And that is so far from the truth. And in fact, one of the things that Tom and I have to deal with a lot, Tom always comes out and says, and I use his line now too, he'll tell families on the initial phone call, we want you to take a backseat until we invite you into the process. Very, very minimal conversation and communication with your loved one while they're in treatment. And the reason being is inadvertently, unintentionally, what happens a lot of times is we'll be doing work with the client, and again, a lot of times unintentionally, not knowing, the family will be literally undoing the work that the therapist is doing behind the therapist's back on phone calls, stuff along those lines. That's why we ask, for the sake of the work our therapist is doing with the client, families take a back seat until the therapist invites you into the process, because the therapist needs to be there to moderate what's appropriate, when it's appropriate, because there might be a good time. Going back to the original topic, there may be a good time to bring up the things that the client did to you. But let's look at it from this perspective too, where the other thing that I want to look at is, are you looking for validation? Because something that we work on with our clients, and especially our therapists, is we're trying to teach our clients to stop seeking outside validation. We want them to become whole within themselves. I love it when Tom tells me I'm great, but I need to have my own self-esteem and self-worth, not dependent on whether or not Tom tells me I'm great.
Do I need to tell you you're great more?
I like it when you do. It makes me feel warm and fuzzy inside. But going back to the question about, do I point this stuff out to the client? Ask yourself, am I looking for validation? I want them to know what they did to me. I want them to know how I feel. And again, there may be a time and place for that. Family weekend, which is under the guise and supervision of our therapists, in particular Maya, who's been on a previous podcast, oversees the family weekend and moderates it. We do impact letters where an appropriate manner, where the way it's supposed to be communicated is controlled. You can get those things off your chest. It's not necessarily what it said, it's how it said. And a lot of times families are incapable for whatever reason. Maybe they just don't know. They don't realize they're doing it. It's not vindictive. Maybe it is. I'll step back for a second and say there are families out there that in a vindictive manner will be like, I want them to know what they did. So we've seen it all,
It's not, I think it's the way in which it's communicated. I would venture to say 90% of the time it does not make sense for you to bring that stuff up. I like what Ben said. If there is a reason to bring it up, it needs to be done in a controlled fashion with some sort of unbiased party, because most families have proven to themselves time and time again that they cannot communicate well. And if you are a family that can communicate well, and you've gone through, a lot of work and you've learned each person's communication styles and, the way that, they receive things and so on and so forth, then okay, maybe, there's an appropriate way. But that's the vast majority of families are not there. They can't communicate. And my own family, myself and my wife, a lot of times we call it the crazy cycle, because it's hard for us sometimes to communicate properly. And even sober, I'll say this, she's never known me as an alcoholic or active alcoholic. She knows, obviously, I'm in recovery, blah, blah, blah. But she's always known me as sober Tom. But that doesn't mean that I'm perfect. I mean, I'm pretty close, but I'm not perfect,
You're perfect.
And so she'll bring up something that I did 6 months ago that really drove her crazy, and sometimes she'll say it in a way that I don't receive it. And then, I get on the defense and I go back at her. Well, if you would have done this, and I wouldn't have done that. And then, so on and so forth. And we get in this crazy cycle. And, our therapist, which we have a therapist, we see a therapist on an individual level and for marriage counseling, not because we have a terrible marriage, but it's more, it's a proactive approach rather than a reactive approach. He told us, listen, when you guys get in this crazy cycle, you call a timeout. One of you call a timeout, and you guys separate from one another for however long it needs to be, 5, 10, 15, 20 minutes. We got 3 kids, so, Who knows how long that timeout could be, a day. And we evaluate the conversation, we evaluate the disagreements and what's taking place, and then we come together and have a constructive conversation around that at that point. But we've been able to do this now through years and years and years of individual therapy and, both couples counseling. So you can get to a point where you're able to do those things. But again, like, most people will say, remember when you did this? Remember when you did that? Remember when you wronged this person, when you wronged that person, when you wronged me? I would venture to say 99, if not 100% of the time, check your motives, because if you check your motives, it is because you want to feel better, which ultimately translate to you want to play the victim,
So do you want to feel better or do you want to feel best? I'm going to make the pointiest point that I can make on this topic right now. Do not rob the addict alcoholic of the opportunity to do their 9th step properly. It's going to be the best for them, and it's also going to be the best for you. Now, what am I talking about? Let me break this down. In the 9th step, I was given a formula by my sponsor. Let's pretend I'm making amends to Tom. Tom, here's what I did to you. Tom, here's what I'll try to do in the future. Tom, did I leave anything out?
No.
I got it all perfect. I ate a lot of Xanax, so I wasn't sure. I may have forgot some stuff.
All right.
Tom, how do you want me to make it right? So there's a formula there. And let me throw a couple points. Would it not be the best outcome for the client, the addict alcoholic, to have their own aha moment and approach you and say, hey, Mom, I realize I really hurt you. Let me tell you the things I did to hurt you. And the reason we asked, did I leave anything out? Boom, Mom, there's your opportunity to say, hey, you didn't mention this. I want to let you know that part really hurt me too. And then you also get the opportunity to say how to make it right. And, my parents, they just want to see me say, stay sober. Keep doing what you're doing, Ben. Stay sober. But you're also given the opportunity to say, say they stole a bunch of money from me. Son, I'd like you to pay that money back to me.
Yeah.
It's don't rob the client of the opportunity to make a proper amends. And it's also going to mean more rather than you going at them and saying, here's what you did. Wouldn't it be better if they came to you and said, Mom, here's what I did? But sometimes that takes time. And that's when going back to the how and the when of it is so important. There will be an appropriate time. We do tell our clients, I tell my sponsees in a 12-step program to do the steps in order. I tell them step 9 is number 9 for a reason. Everybody gets the treatment and they're like, oh, I want to go make amends. You know why we don't let people make amends right away, Tom?
Why?
Comes down to motives, what we were talking about earlier.
Yeah.
I got to treatment. I'm 10 days in. I'm feeling lifted up. I'm sober Ben. You guys trust me again, right? I want to make amends selfishly so that I can put my head on my pillow at night. I haven't found the recovery, the spiritual principles yet that early in my recovery to make an amends for the reason that it should be met. So the 9th step says, except when to do so would injure them or others. I don't fall under others. It's about cleaning my side of the street and making it better for the people around me and the world around me. I have to admit my faults, and it's so much better when I admit my own faults versus Tom telling me what my faults are.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's worth saying, too, if somebody goes through this process in the way that it's written out and the way that it's constructed, because I know there's listeners out there right now that are thinking to themselves, yeah, but what if they don't make that amends? They miss something. They miss something in the first 8 steps. How would you answer that if somebody says, okay, yeah, they said they worked the steps, but they never gave me an amends?
I would turn right back around as an outsider looking in and go back to what I originally said. Why is it you need that validation to feel better?
But it's my son.
And a lot of the times, I see where you're coming from, but there's living amends too. And we're not allowed to tell people when the timeline of their process has to be. I've known people who haven't made amends for years and then finally made it one day. So, and that's the importance of Al-Anon, being okay, working a program yourself, working 12 steps for yourself so that you can be okay, regardless of whether the addict alcoholic made amends to you, whether or not they stayed sober. And that's what this is all about. Like, turn it around and look at yourself.
Yeah, a lot of it, I think, has to do with expectations.
Yep. There's a saying in recovery, expectations are prepaid resentments.
Yeah. If you wait for this person to make that amends to you and to come to you and, say all the things that they did wrong, you could be let down. You really could. And, how you handle that is really, it's on you. It's something that, you just have to figure out on your own, and that's really it.
Let me say this too, because this could be the case, and you asked me, like, hey, if they haven't come. One of the things that I was shown is I judge myself off of my intentions. Other people judge me off of my actions, right? So I could go make a verbal amends to somebody, but let me just ask, wouldn't it mean even more if you just see me living it?
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
Sometimes, I'm not going to venture to say always, but sometimes there's occasions where, for me, watching somebody else take corrective measures in their life means more than any words they would say to me. You know how many people have come up to me, actually, now that you bring it up, I'm just thinking of real life circumstances, because they've been at treatment here, maybe they were a jerk one day or something along those lines. I've had a lot of people come to me over the years and say, Ben, I owe you amends. And my response, I would venture to say 100% of the time over the years, has been, no, you don't owe me an amends. Just keep what you're doing. Keep doing what you're doing. You're on the right path. Just keep doing what you're doing.
Yep. And that comes, and that shows too where you're at.
Exactly. And if someone is working Al-Anon, and I guess that's my whole point. Hopefully it's been verbalized correctly and in a way that's clear and concise, but being okay with yourself, regardless. Go back to, what is my motive for telling somebody what they did to me?
Well put, Ben.
Right?
I think that was it.
That was a pretty good topic.
That was a good topic. I went into it kind of, we'll see how this goes, but I think it went pretty well.
Yeah, and I want to reiterate, like, this process is very hard. When you are emotionally caught up in it, when it is your son, your daughter, your loved one, there's a lot of emotion there. And, people do have a tendency to want to blame. I'm the same way. Fortunately, I've got this way of life I live through 12 steps now, but I do go back to looking for somebody to blame. They should have done this. They should have done that. They owe me an apology. But I always do my best to step back, circle back, and say, what would the program have me do? We're all human beings. We are not saints, one of our readings says. We're striving for progress, not perfection. And sometimes we don't nail it perfectly, but as long as we're circling back to those principles and those steps, we'll be well on our way.
That's it. All right. You got anything else?
I don't. It's a beautiful day out.
You're probably hungry.
I am hungry. We got Greek food coming today, and I'm having a cheat meal.
All right. Well, that is it for this episode of Real Recovery Talk. Thank you for tuning in. In the end, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, you could always reach us, Tom at realrecoverytalk.com and Ben at realrecoverytalk.com. And ultimately, what we want to do is help you turn your mess into your message. That is it. We will see y'all later.